Today is a big day for Led Zeppelin month. Today is a day I've been waiting for a long, long time. Because today is the day when I'll finally get around to ranking all 9 Led Zeppelin studio albums from worst to absolute best. And I gotta say, this has been a serious challenge. It's been fun, but damn, it's been challenging. Because Led Zeppelin just might have one of the greatest album discographies of all time. If they released just their first 4 albums alone, they'd still be granted a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That is just how damn good they are. They had a perfect 6-album run of sheer perfection. And I don't think that's been topped by any other artist since. These guys are legendary, and even their dud, weak albums, most of them would still be seen as gold nuggets on most other artists' discographies, just further proving what a great band Led Zeppelin is. And I finally got around to ranking them. And I have spent months and months and months on organizing and ranking and reorganizing and listing and all this other crazy stuff, but I think I have finally found a conclusion that will keep me absolutely satisfied. So now I give you all 9 Led Zeppelin studio albums ranked from worst to best. Let's get this started. You may have noticed that I stated that there was 9 proper Led Zeppelin studio albums, but in the intro I only showed 8 album covers. Well, what gives? I'll tell you. CODA is barely even a proper Led Zeppelin album at all. It's more like a rough collection of random studio outtakes from previous sessions, songs that just weren't good enough to get on any other Led Zeppelin album, so just as a last hurrah, they just decided to put them all together and release them out into the public, and that's how CODA was born. John Bonham was already dead by the time this album was released, and the band had already disbanded a long time ago. So, it's barely even a proper Led Zeppelin album, but it's not without its merits. It actually has a couple of pretty memorable songs, like, classics like Walter's Walk, I think, is one of them. Okay, it's not exactly a classic Led Zeppelin album, but if you're a completionist, then it's worth getting, and I think if you really delve into it, there are a couple nuggets. But as far as Led Zeppelin standard goes, it's the bottom of the barrel. Although technically the last official Led Zeppelin album is 1982's CODA, the real final album of Led Zeppelin, with them all together as a band in the studio, is 1979's In Through the Outdoor. And I'm going to say this first, it's not a bad album. It has a pretty good number of classics like In the Evening, All My Love, Fool in the Rain, and I'm Gonna Crawl. But when you really compare it to a lot of previous Led Zeppelin albums, it just can't really stand a chance. It's kind of poppy, a lot of experimentation with synthesizers. It's just not really what you would expect from a Led Zeppelin album. A lot of the songs are just weak compared to their previous efforts. And as I said, not a bad album, but if you're ranking Led Zeppelin, then only the cream of the crop can get to the top. And In For the Outdoor just isn't the cream. When considering that Robert Plant was confined to a wheelchair for the entirety of the recording of Presence, you can kind of see that this album actually isn't that bad. It's actually pretty good. It's mainly kept afloat by 2 of the best songs Led Zeppelin has ever recorded. Nobody's Fault But Mine, and possibly my favorite Led Zeppelin song of all time, tied with the Immigrant Song, Achilles' Last Stand. Underrated, epic. Every Led Zeppelin fan needs to hear that. Achilles' Last Stand. After you're done with the video, listen to it. One of the best songs they've ever made. Like, no lie. But the thing that really drags this album down is a trio of songs I call the Terrible Three. Hot Off for Nowhere, Royal Orleans, and Candy Store Rock. 3 of the weakest songs Led Zeppelin has ever recorded. So it's kind of an album of extremes. On one end, we have 2 of the awesomest songs we've ever made, and on the other end, we have 3 of the worst songs ever made. So it's And T for One is pretty good, and For Your Life is average. So it's kind of an uneven album, I think, and it was rushed, and as I said, it was made in pretty tough conditions, but even still, I think it's a pretty good album, even though there are some Led Zeppelin fans that think it's massively underrated and is one of their best. I'm not one of them, but still, it's pretty good. To be completely honest with you guys, the last 3 Led Zeppelin albums were pretty easy to eliminate quick. But right here at the number 6 spot is when things start to get difficult. Real difficult. And I have to start doing things I don't want to do, like put Houses of the Holy so damn low. I'm sorry. I tried and tried. I tried to find a way to slip into the top 5, but I just couldn't. Led Zeppelin just has too many amazing albums. I had to put it at number 6. And as I stated at the beginning, all of the first 6 Led Zeppelin albums are each in their own wonderful way an amazing landmark of music. But if I had to piss on one of the first 6, I'm sorry, but it'd have to be Houses of the Holy. Quirky, fun, strange, curious, and endlessly fascinating, Houses of the Holy has irked me ever since I first bought it last March. It's such an unusual album and shows them delving into all of these new, different, quirky styles that you would have never expected them to, like reggae and funk and whatever the hell No Quarter's supposed to be. It's a weird album, but also shows them at their most musically ambitious. Houses of the Holy proved to all of Led Zeppelin's critics that they were more than just a smash your guitars and scream blues ripoff band. It showed that Led Zeppelin, they could create beautiful, new, imaginative, and completely unique material without ripping anyone off, which is why I think it's their most original album to date. And any other artist would just die to have this album as their own. But Led Zeppelin is so amazing that they actually have 5 that are better than it. This whole ranking was pretty tough for me to make, especially considering the placement of the 3 middle Led Zeppelin albums. I mean, all 3 are just so, interchangeable and equally awesome that I kept on flip-flopping them all around, and I could never decide where to put them. And this was especially difficult for my respective 5 and 6 spots belonging to 3 in Houses of the Holy. I would have my whole list set to jet, and then I would just make one slight altercation, and then I would just change it back, and then change again, and then change it back, and then change it again. And then I finally made up my mind and just decided that I just really dig Led Zeppelin 3. I mean, no disrespect to Houses here. I think that on an objective scale, technically, Houses of the Holy is a better album. It's more ambitious, it's more musically complex, has more songs that people know. But when I'm just looking for a Led Zeppelin album to kick back to, I usually find myself grabbing 3 over Houses. I don't know. But that's why Led Zeppelin 3 is kicking off my top 5. Like Houses, 3 is a fairly unusual Led Zeppelin album, known for its abundance of acoustic numbers, with the entirety of Side 2 consisting exclusively of songs free of electronic instrumentation, and shows the boys playing weird, unorthodox instruments like tablas, banjos, and fiddles, which I actually think is pretty cool, and shows that there was another side to Led Zeppelin other than just being a bunch of ball-swinging sex gods. However, at the time, fans and critics alike saw the album as a huge disappointment and were appalled at this strange new change of direction. They wanted the heaviest band in the world back, not a bunch of cottage-dwelling hippies. They wanted another heavy metal monster like Led Zeppelin 2, not a bunch of acoustic songs. But as the years went by, it gained in popularity due to its fresh, brisk, folksy vibes and slew of unique tracks, from the driving, howling Viking anthem of Immigrant Song, to the serene, touching Tangerine, to the kooky, manic Celebration Day, to the passionate, intense blues epic Since I've Been Loving You. Although it may not be a favorite of yours at first, eventually this underrated, magical little nugget will eventually find its way into your heart. When Led Zeppelin released their debut album in January 1969, the world of music would never be the same again. Led Zeppelin 1 may not top this ranking, but it is easily one of the most influential albums ever recorded. The critics at first hated it, but they just weren't ready for what a massive impact this album would have on rock and roll. It was an album of past and future, both harkening back to the blues roots, yet projecting a brand new hard-rocking heavy metal future that was just beginning. Heavy metal and hard rock started with this album right here. And not to mention the outstanding track list. Good Times, Bad Times, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, Dazed and Confused, Communication Breakdown, How Many More Times. This is a fantastic album and hasn't aged a day since 1969. It may not top the list, but as I said, the impact this has is immeasurable. One of the greatest debut albums of all time. Did I say The Houses was their most musically ambitious album? Because I take that back now and give that title to my number 3 pick, Physical Graffiti. Physical Graffiti has absolutely everything you could ever want in a Led Zeppelin album. Times 2. As it's their only double album, that just means more Led Zeppelin, and things can only go up from there. They do absolutely everything here, from funky organ stomps, to extended blues jams, to towering Eastern epics, to sleazy riff rockers. Everything is on this album, not to mention the number of just criminally underrated tracks. Sick Again, The Rover, 10 Years Gone, In the Light. This album, at first, it took me a while to buy it, but I am so happy I did, because this might be one of their most ambitious works to date. And the mere fact that they have 2 albums that are better than this is just extraordinary, because Physical Graffiti is excellent. After the release of Led Zeppelin 1 in early 1969, people had some pretty big expectations for their next album, and a lot of artists go through somewhat of a sophomore slump when their second album isn't nearly as good as the first one. And Led Zeppelin is not one of those bands, because here on Led Zeppelin 2, they absolutely killed it. Every song on here just rocks. I mean, Whole Lotta Love, What Is and What Should Never Be, The Lemon Song, Heartbreaker, Ramble On, Moby Dick, Bring It On Home. This is 24-karat rock and roll right here. If Led Zeppelin 1 was the seed that started heavy metal, then this is the tree fully in bloom. This album kicks ass. And it may not be number 1, but it is probably my favorite Led Zeppelin album of all time, and possibly one of my favorite albums of all time. This is amazing album. That's right. My number 1 pick for the best Led Zeppelin album is none other than 1971's Led Zeppelin 4. Yeah, I know it may seem a bit generic to give this album the number 1 spot, because it's usually the album that tops most people's lists. But that's for good reason, because this album is absolutely fantastic. It's just perfect. It's often hailed as being one of the finest rock and roll records ever made. It's completely consistent the whole way through. Has everything a great Led Zeppelin album needs. It has rockers, it has radio hits, it has epics, it has acoustic numbers, it has deep cuts, it has everything. I couldn't think of a single other album in their entire discography that could be a better introduction to Led Zeppelin in all their might and glory than Led Zeppelin 4. And if it wasn't for this album, I probably wouldn't be into Led Zeppelin at all. It's the first one I heard, and the first time I heard it, I was hooked ever since. This really is a great album, and it really is everything that Led Zeppelin is, and that's why it gets my number 1 spot. Well, guys, that was my ranking of all the Led Zeppelin albums. I hope you liked it, because I spent a really long time on it. And I know that Led Zeppelin albums are things that people have very differing opinions about. So if you thought Presence was too low, or you don't like Physical Graffiti or something, then just tell me in the comment section below, because I'd love to see your list. So, happy Led Zeppelin month, and until next time, bye.